I hadn't even reached the pew when she said it. Calm, casual, cruel. Don't waste the front row on her. The same front row I'd sat in for 30 years. The same row I paid for when the roof leaked. When the choir needed robes. When the lights flickered mid-sermon. My daughter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Not when the whole sanctuary heard her anyway. I didn't argue. I just sat 2 rows back, Bible in hand, dignity intact. And that week, I donated the pew. Had a plaque engraved in brass. Now, every Sunday, she walks in and stares at the seat she tried to steal. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning air still smelled faintly of salt and magnolia as Evelyn Carter stepped onto the brick path leading up to First Baptist of Charleston. The bells had just begun to chime, their tone rising above the creak of iron gates and the shuffle of well-polished shoes. She walked slowly but with purpose, Bible cradled against her hip, hat pinned neatly in place, gloves folded into her purse. The sanctuary's double doors swung wide, letting out a rush of cool air and the soft murmur of pre-service chatter. Inside, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering reds and blues across the pews like blessings no one asked for, but all accepted. Evelyn stepped into the aisle, her eyes trained on the front pew, the one she had sat in for over 30 years. Right side, second seat in. The cushion always held a slight dip, one molded by memory and faith and presence. She made it 3 steps before she heard Melissa's voice. Don't waste the front row on her. The words weren't shouted, but they were loud enough, sharp enough to slice through the soft organ prelude. Evelyn froze. The usher, a nervous young man from one of the newer families, glanced between them with uncertainty. Melissa stood just behind him in her cream silk dress, flawless makeup, not a hair out of place. Paul, her husband, hovered beside her, shoulders slightly slouched, hands in his pockets. He didn't look up. I mean, Melissa added, lowering her voice only enough to feign civility. She's not on the committee anymore. Let's keep the front row open for people who are involved. The usher offered a hesitant smile toward Evelyn, half apologetic, half unsure. A woman 2 pews back turned to her husband and whispered, not quietly enough. Another man leaned in and furrowed his brow. A wave of discomfort spread, gentle but undeniable, like a sudden shift in the room's temperature. Evelyn didn't move. Her grip on her Bible tightened, leather creaking under her gloved fingers. Her spine stayed straight, her chin level. But her eyes dimmed just slightly, like someone had drawn the curtain back from a private moment. From the choir loft above, Doris King saw everything. Her hymn book snapped shut. Doris leaned forward over the railing, eyes narrowing behind her bifocals. She didn't speak. Not yet. But the expression on her face made clear she would. Given one more wrong word. Her hand hovered above the railing like it was ready to slam down with finality. Evelyn turned, graceful, unhurried, and stepped aside, making her way toward the 3rd pew instead. Her seat of habit had been taken, but she would not fight in God's house. As she sat, Melissa floated past her, claiming the space like it had always belonged to her. Paul followed wordlessly, neither looked back. The organist shifted into the opening hymn. Congregants rose, voices rising with practiced familiarity. Evelyn sang the notes softly, never missing a beat, her tone as even as her posture. Pastor Green approached the pulpit, offering his usual warm welcome. But his eyes flickered to the front row, then to Evelyn. He hesitated a beat before continuing. His voice was steady, but the warmth had cooled a degree. He had noticed. Everyone had. After the scripture reading, during the call to prayer, Evelyn bowed her head, But she didn't close her eyes. Instead, she looked down at the nameplate still embossed on her worn leather Bible. Evelyn M. Carter, 1976. She didn't weep. She didn't whisper. But something in her posture shifted. Not broken, but rooted. The kind of shift trees make when the storm begins. They don't run. They dig deeper. Above her, Doris gave a single, curt nod, almost a battle cry in its subtlety. And Melissa? Melissa sat primly, legs crossed, oblivious, her head tilted slightly toward the pulpit, but her eyes wandered, already bored. Evelyn looked at her daughter and saw not power, but a shadow playing pretend in a sunlit room. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn Carter felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not bitterness, not pride, resolve. She whispered 2 words into her folded hands, more declaration than prayer. Noted. Remembered. The choir rose behind her, the sanctuary lifted with voices, and Evelyn sat, unmoved, eyes wide open. The Charleston humidity clung to the screen door as Evelyn stepped back into her cottage. The scent of jasmine still lingering in the entryway. She hung her church hat on the brass hook beside the mirror and slipped out of her shoes with quiet precision, the same way she had done every Sunday for nearly 50 years. The living room welcomed her with familiar stillness. No ticking clock. No television murmuring in the background. Just the creak of the floorboards beneath her and the hush of a house that had learned to keep her pace. Evelyn placed her Bible on the hallway table, then walked with deliberate calm toward the small cabinet tucked beneath the stairs. The key was where it always was, inside the empty tea tin at the back of the cupboard. She unlocked the cabinet and slid the drawer open. Inside, everything was where it had been for decades. Manila folders, labeled in her steady handwriting, arranged chronologically from the mid-1980s onward. Church bulletins, correspondence, printed newsletters, donation receipts, organized by year, in tidy envelopes with her initials on the front. She pulled them out one by one. 1993, Bell Restoration Fund. 1997, Sanctuary Roof Replacement. 2004, Children's Wing Expansion. 2009, Pipe Organ Maintenance. 2015, Scholarship Sponsorship, Carter Family Trust. Each envelope was full. Copies of checks, thank you notes signed by pastors long since retired, acknowledgement letters bearing her name. Evelyn sat at the small roll-top desk, a lamp casting a soft pool of light onto the papers. She worked in silence, reading through the years, page after page. There were names of families she hadn't seen in a decade, projects she had funded without ceremony, donations she had made in memory of her husband, Samuel, whose name still appeared in the Easter bulletin every year. And not once, did Melissa's name appear. Not on a check, not on a form, not even in the handwritten donor notes Naomi Brooks compiled for the annual banquet. Evelyn let her hand rest on the final folder. She stared at the signature lines, her name, written in the same looping cursive each time. Her shoulders eased back into the chair. She smiled, not smug, not triumphant, just a quiet, knowing curve of the mouth that only comes when something deeply buried begins to surface. Truth, dignity, history. She stood, walked to the hallway credenza, and lifted the velvet-lined box where she kept her church name badges and usher tags. She pulled one out, a brushed bronze pin that read, Evelyn M. Carter, Lifetime Benefactor. Below it, a second tag gleamed beneath a dusting of powder. Founder's Circle. In perpetuity. Evelyn blinked slowly, then turned toward the telephone. The number she dialed was familiar, though she hadn't used it in years. Not since the church's last property expansion when they'd needed someone to notarize a land use agreement. The line rang twice. Franklin Harris, came the smooth, gravel-warm voice on the other end. Church council, who's calling? Evelyn's voice was steady. It's Evelyn Carter. A pause, then warm recognition. Ms. Carter. Well now, this is a surprise. I'd like to talk to you about a pew, she said simply. A pew? Franklin chuckled lightly. Well, that's not a call I get every day. You looking to sponsor one? I'm looking to dedicate one. The air on the other end sharpened a bit. Curious, but respectful. All right, he said. Let's make a time. I have availability tomorrow afternoon. I can call Naomi, have her prep the paperwork. That would be fine. Evelyn didn't ask for further explanation. Didn't offer one. She didn't need to. Glad to hear your voice, Miss Carter, Franklin added. You're still remembered around here. I know, she said quietly. That's the part Melissa keeps forgetting. She hung up gently, then walked back to the desk. The donation folders still sat open, testimony in paper form. She slid them back into their place, one by one, like bricks back into a wall. Her history wasn't just intact. It was documented. And tomorrow, she'd make sure it lived on. Not in whispers, but in engraving. Jasper's Diner sat on the corner of Meeting and Cannon Streets, the kind of place where the waitresses knew your order before you sat down. The scent of bacon and coffee clung to the air like a hymn that never ended. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead, stirring the scent of buttered toast and nostalgia. Evelyn slid into a vinyl booth beside the window. The late morning sun poured through the glass, catching the glint of her wedding band, still on her finger after all these years. She placed her Bible gently on the table beside the salt shaker and folded her hands. She had called Doris the night before. Her friend hadn't asked questions, only said, 10 a.m.? Bring your appetite. Right on cue, Doris swept in like a gust of warm air, choir pin still fastened to her lapel. She plunked her oversized purse onto the seat, sat across from Evelyn, and signaled for coffee before even taking off her sunglasses. You look like you've been chewing glass, Doris said without preamble. Evelyn gave a small, tight smile. I heard something at church I can't unhear. The waitress poured coffee for both of them and left a dish of creamers. Evelyn stirred hers slowly, watching the swirl of white in black. Melissa, she began, at the front pew. She didn't repeat all of it, just enough for Doris to catch the shape of the wound. Doris's spoon clanged against her saucer. She said that? In God's house? Her voice rose half an octave, drawing glances from the next booth. She did, Evelyn said softly, and I moved back, sat third row. Doris slammed her spoon down, rattling the sugar packets. Donate the row. Evelyn looked up. What? You heard me? Doris leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes glinting like stained glass catching sunlight. You've kept that church afloat for 30 years. You built half those programs. You want that pew? Make it yours. Carve your name in brass so she has to stare at it every Sunday. Evelyn sipped her coffee, her hands steady. That's not why I gave. No, Doris said. But maybe it's why you should give this time. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked past Doris, out the window, where a couple walked by hand in hand, their church bulletins tucked under their arms. She saw her reflection faintly superimposed over them. Older, lined, steady, not broken. She nodded slowly. I've already called Franklin. Doris blinked, then grinned like a cat seeing cream. You old fox. The waitress set down 2 plates of biscuits and grits, steam curling upward. Doris picked up her fork but didn't break eye contact. You're not doing this to spite her? I'm doing this to remember me? Evelyn said. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text notification. She turned it face up. Paul Carter. Melissa didn't mean it. Evelyn read the words twice, thumb hovering above the screen. The diner noise faded into the background, the clatter of plates, the low hum of a gospel tune on the jukebox. Doris muttering about Some nerve. Without another thought, Evelyn tapped delete message. Doris caught the motion, raised an eyebrow. Good. Evelyn set the phone back down, screen dark. Some things don't need a reply. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the kind that only old friends could sit in without fidgeting. The biscuits were flaky, the coffee strong. Each bite anchored Evelyn a little more firmly in her decision. You know what I like about you? Doris said finally. What? You don't shout. You just move pieces until the board belongs to you. Evelyn smiled faintly. I learned that from Samuel. Chess on the porch every evening. Then he'd be proud, Doris said. Because you're about to play the cleanest checkmate Charleston's ever seen. Evelyn looked down at her hands, fingers resting lightly on the edge of her plate. She felt no malice, no fire. Only that same deep-rooted resolve she'd felt the moment she whispered, noted, remembered. Outside, a church bell chimed the hour. And inside the diner, Evelyn Carter decided exactly what would happen next. The church offices were tucked behind the main sanctuary, old brick lined with moss and flowering crepe myrtles, a little oasis of quiet in downtown Charleston. Evelyn stepped through the back entrance, heels clicking softly against the worn tile as Naomi Brooks greeted her with a warm smile. Miss Carter? Naomi said, already rising from her desk. He's expecting you. Evelyn nodded politely. She wore her Sunday best, though it was a weekday. Navy skirt suit, pearl studs, the same handbag she took to every deacon's luncheon when Samuel was still alive. She carried nothing else, just presence. Naomi gestured toward the door down the hall. Go on in, he's ready. Franklin Harris's office smelled like old wood and lemon oil, the blinds half drawn against the late morning sun. A framed photograph of the church hung behind his desk, just above a shelf of thick legal books and dusty hymnals. Franklin stood as she entered. Ms. Carter. He extended a hand, his grip firm, respectful. Or should I say, Miss Evelyn? That's what my mother always called you. She smiled faintly. Either works. Have a seat. He motioned toward the leather armchair across from his desk. Naomi's pulling the notary log, but I thought we could walk through the paperwork first. He flipped open a manila folder and turned it toward her. The top page read, Dedication Request, Pew Donation Donor. Evelyn M. Carter. Location. Sanctuary. Front row, right side, second seat. Inscription. Request. Reserved in honor of Evelyn M. Carter. In gratitude and grace. Evelyn took her reading glasses from her bag and scanned the page, her fingers brushing the edges like they were pages of scripture. This covers the pew maintenance, engraving, and inclusion in the annual report, Franklin said, pointing to each clause as he spoke. It's perpetual, non-transferable unless by your written consent. Melissa can't undo it later? She asked. He shook his head gently. Not unless she makes a separate donation and gets your permission. And I imagine that's unlikely. Very, Evelyn said, voice dry as kindling. Franklin chuckled, then sobered. I want you to know, this will be noticed. Quietly, but unmistakably. We haven't had a new front row dedication in nearly a decade. Evelyn looked him in the eye. That's why I want it. He nodded once, then passed her a pen. She set the glasses aside, took the pen in her right hand, and signed. Her script was slow but deliberate, clean, no trembling. Evelyn M. Carter. As she handed the pen back, Naomi entered with her notary kit, clipboard in one hand, church ledger in the other. I brought the church seal, Naomi said with a soft smile. This one's going in the book. Evelyn raised a brow. The red one or the gold? The gold. Naomi winked. We save that for the permanent records. She had Evelyn initial 2 lines and then pressed the embossed seal into the lower right corner with a quiet thunk. The paper curled slightly beneath the pressure, the imprint catching the light. And just like that, it was done. Evelyn exhaled. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But something shifted in her chest. A weight she hadn't known was pressing down had finally lifted. The pew, the plaque, the acknowledgement. It wasn't just for her. It was for the woman she'd been. Year after year showing up with casseroles, committee notes, and pledge checks. Naomi packed up the ledger and gave Evelyn's hand a gentle squeeze. "It's long overdue." "Thank you," Evelyn said. She rose, smoothing her skirt with quiet dignity. "I'll see you Sunday." Franklin walked her to the door. "We'll have the plaque installed by Friday," he said. Quietly. No announcement. Evelyn smiled, that same calm smile she wore the day of her wedding, the day of Samuel's funeral, and every Easter since. "The pew will speak for itself." She stepped out into the sunshine, past the crepe myrtles swaying gently in the breeze. The air smelled like possibility. Inside, Franklin returned to his desk and added one more document to the church's long line of history. And behind the sealed folder, Naomi reached for her phone, because Melissa Carter had just texted her a question. "Will the front pews be available this week?" Naomi stared at the message and made no reply. The sanctuary smelled of lemon polish and fresh lilies, the way it always did on Communion Sundays. Early sunlight cut through the stained glass, scattering flecks of crimson and sapphire over the polished wood floors. The organ was still silent. Only the shuffle of hymnals and the muted buzz of whispered greetings filled the air. Evelyn slipped in through the side door, hat tilted low, gloves clasped neatly in her hands. She didn't head for her usual aisle seat. Instead, she stood in the shadow of a column near the vestibule, watching. Melissa had arrived before most of the congregation, heels clicking on the tile, Paul shuffling behind her like a man being led to his seat at a play he didn't buy tickets for. She breezed past the usher, barely glancing at him, and marched straight to the front row. The front row she'd dismissed her mother from just a week before. "Come on," she hissed over her shoulder at Paul. "Sit with me here." Paul hesitated, glancing back toward the usher, but followed without protest. Melissa smoothed her pale blue dress once she reached the pew, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as if the entire sanctuary were her living room. Evelyn's Bible was tucked beneath her arm. She watched without blinking, her face serene, unreadable. Only the faint rise and fall of her breath betrayed the weight of the moment. Up in the loft, Doris caught sight of her and gave the smallest tilt of her chin. Ready. Waiting. At the far end of the aisle, Naomi Brooks emerged from the narthex with a clipboard. She wasn't in her usual office attire today. She wore a simple cream blouse and a name badge, but her posture had an edge to it, professional, but not apologetic. She walked straight to the front pew and stopped at the aisle. "Good morning," Naomi said softly, but her voice carried. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter." Melissa looked up, smile polite but thin. "Morning, Naomi. We're fine here." Naomi's eyes flicked briefly toward Evelyn in the shadows, then back to Melissa. "I'm afraid this pew isn't available for general seating anymore." Melissa blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's reserved," Naomi said evenly. Paul shifted uncomfortably, his knee knocking the hymnal rack. "Reserved?" he echoed, as if testing the word. Melissa straightened her shoulders, chin up. "Since when? This is the front row. It's always first come, first served." Naomi's lips curved into the faintest of polite smiles. "Since Friday." Melissa frowned. "Why?" Naomi reached out and turned the small brass plaque at the end of the pew so it caught the morning light. The engraved letters gleamed, reserved in honor of Evelyn M. Carter. In gratitude and grace. The sanctuary seemed to hush itself. A few heads turned. A whisper rippled through the nearest pews. Melissa stared at the plaque, as if it were written in another language. Her hand hovered above it but didn't touch. This is some kind of mistake, she said, her voice louder now. No mistake, Naomi replied. It's been properly dedicated, paperwork filed, notarized, and sealed. This pew is no longer open seating. Paul cleared his throat, leaning closer to Melissa. Maybe we should— No, Melissa snapped, but softer than she'd intended. She looked past Naomi, scanning the room, and her gaze landed on Evelyn, still standing by the column. Their eyes met. Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't smile. She simply shifted her Bible from one hand to the other and inclined her head once, like a queen acknowledging a subject. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Naomi spoke again, gently but firmly. I can help you find another seat. Perhaps third row? Paul rose first, murmuring something Evelyn couldn't catch. Melissa stayed seated a moment longer, her fingers pressing against the pew's polished edge like she might anchor herself there by will alone. But the plaque didn't move. Finally, Melissa stood. Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped back, her expression caught between disbelief and indignation. Paul followed, eyes downcast. Naomi gestured toward the side aisle. This way, please. They walked past Evelyn without a word. Melissa's perfume trailed faintly behind her, sweet and sharp, but her face was pale. Evelyn stepped forward, her heels silent on the carpet. She slipped into the pew, her pew, and placed her Bible gently on the cushion. The engraved plaque glinted beside her hand. Up in the loft, Doris smiled. Not the gloating smile of revenge, but the quiet satisfaction of justice done in daylight. The organ struck the opening chord. Congregants rose, the sanctuary filled with sound. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Carter sat where she belonged, sunlight falling across her lap, her name etched in brass for all to see. The hymn had barely reached the second verse when Melissa rose abruptly, her silk scarf fluttering over her shoulder like a signal flag. The congregation sang on, voices lifting in quiet praise, but her heels stabbed the aisle carpet with every step. Evelyn didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. She felt it, the tension walking out of the room. Paul followed 5 seconds later, sheepish and silent, eyes locked on the exit sign as if it were salvation. He gave a small, apologetic nod toward no one in particular as he passed. The ushers at the back doors instinctively parted to let them through. From the choir loft, Doris saw it all. She didn't sing the next verse. Didn't need to. Her lips pressed together in something dangerously close to a grin. Not smugness, just the hard-won satisfaction of a woman who'd watched too many people disrespect someone who had built the very pew they sat in. The final chord faded. The pastor's voice rose to begin the sermon, and Evelyn Carter knelt. Her knees sank into the cushion of the front row prayer bench, hers now, officially, eternally. Her back remained straight, her gloved hands folded over her Bible. She didn't pray aloud, she didn't mouth the words. She simply breathed, deeply, calmly, a rhythm of reverence and memory. She prayed not for revenge, not even for her daughter. She prayed for peace, and for the strength to keep holding it when the storms tried to reclaim her silence. The sanctuary carried on, unbothered by the absence of 2 parishioners who hadn't really been present in years. By the time the benediction ended and the choir began filing out, Evelyn had already risen to her feet and walked toward the side aisle. Naomi met her near the exit, holding a manila envelope in one hand and a grateful smile in the other. Ms. Carter, she said softly, I wanted to give you this personally. Evelyn took the envelope. The seal on the flap had the church crest freshly stamped. The finalized paperwork, Naomi continued, the donation deed, the official ledger notation, the plaque confirmation, everything's in there. Evelyn gave her a small nod. Thank you. No, Naomi said gently, her voice dipping into something more personal. Thank you. For everything. Most people don't realize how much of this place still runs because of what you gave. And not just money. Evelyn met her eyes. I didn't give to be thanked. I know, Naomi replied, which is exactly why you deserve to be. Evelyn tucked the envelope into her handbag and offered her hand. Naomi took it without hesitation. There was warmth in the gesture, respect, perhaps even awe. Behind them, congregants began filtering out. A few paused, their glances lingering toward the pew, toward Evelyn. One or two nodded. A man from the finance committee whispered something to his wife and offered a small wave. Evelyn returned it with the grace of a woman who had never demanded attention, only earned it. She stepped into the sunlight outside the sanctuary, the warmth folding around her like a shawl. Doris caught up a minute later, choir robe draped over her arm. Left mid-hymn, she said under her breath, adjusting her glasses. Like a child who didn't get the last cookie. She wanted the row, Evelyn replied quietly. Doris squinted. She wanted the crown. The row was just the throne. Evelyn smiled faintly but didn't respond. They stood for a moment near the azalea bushes flanking the church entrance, watching families gather and part, hugs exchanged, cars idling. The world was moving on, as it always did. Then Evelyn reached into her bag, ran her fingers across the sealed envelope from Naomi, and pulled out a single sheet. Her copy of the dedication confirmation. It was simple, clean. Her name etched in typeface that would be transcribed onto brass. A row no longer taken for granted. A legacy no longer borrowed. Will you come by Jasper's this week? Doris asked. Pie's on me. Evelyn folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. I just might, she said. I think I'd like that. Behind them, the church doors closed gently with a final click. And across the lawn, Melissa sat alone in her car. Windows rolled down, engine off, expression unreadable. Watching the front row slip further and further from her grasp. The phone lit up before the kettle finished whistling. Evelyn glanced at the screen. Facebook notification, then another, then 2 missed calls. One from her cousin Lorraine in Savannah, the other from her second niece Shelby, who hadn't called since 2016. She silenced the phone and turned off the stove. Pouring hot water over her tea blend, chamomile, peppermint, and a pinch of lemon verbena from her own garden. She stirred it slowly, let it steep. Then she opened the notifications. Melissa had posted again. Nothing like church politics to remind you where the real power lies. Some folks care more about brass plaques than people. I said what I said. Underneath, a string of vague emojis. One praying, one frowning, one shrugging. The comments were worse. Aunt Cassie. What happened, hun? We saw something about your mom on the church page. Melissa. Let's just say I learned a lot about loyalty this week. Someone from Paul's office. You deserve better. Keep your head high. Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't even react. Instead, she opened the back door, stepped outside barefoot, and let the late morning breeze wrap around her. Her tea in one hand, her silence in the other. The phone rang again. This time, she answered. Evelyn? Lorraine's voice, syrupy with concern. I didn't want to believe what I saw on the internet, but is everything all right? Did you and Melissa fight? Evelyn sat down on the porch swing, the cushion cool beneath her. She took a sip of tea before answering. I gave back to my church, she said simply. That's all. But the post? Evelyn smiled faintly. Sometimes people don't like being reminded they didn't give anything to begin with. There was a pause. Then Lorraine exhaled. Well, if you ask me, you've done more for that church than the last 3 pastors combined. Evelyn chuckled softly. I didn't ask, but thank you. She ended the call gently, then turned the phone face down on the porch table. A cardinal landed on the feeder nearby. It chirped once, then flew off toward the azaleas. The door creaked behind her. Doris stepped out, holding a bag of lemon cookies and 2 paper fans. "Saw the post?" she said. "All lowercase letters and no accountability." I didn't answer. Best answer ever. Doris handed her a cookie and sat down beside her, tucking her robe around her like it was armor. People like Melissa bank on your silence meaning guilt. But your silence means you've already won. Inside the house, another notification buzzed. Evelyn ignored it. Later that afternoon, Pastor Green called. He didn't bring up Melissa's posts. He didn't need to. Instead, he simply said, "Ms. Carter, I wanted to thank you for your support, your discretion, and your grace." "Thank you, Pastor." He cleared his throat gently. "I know this isn't how recognition is supposed to arrive, but I also know you've earned it 100 times over." "I didn't do it for recognition," Evelyn said, "but I'm glad it's recorded. You'll see it in the program next Sunday. I'll be there early." That night, a final email arrived. Franklin Harris. Subject: Confirmation. Permanent dedication, Evelyn. As of 3:42 p.m. today, your dedication and donation record has been filed, sealed, and listed on the church's public records. The plaque is permanent, the seat is yours. The record cannot be undone. See you Sunday? FH. Evelyn closed her laptop. She didn't screenshot Melissa's post, didn't show it to Doris, didn't bring it up again. Instead, she slipped the email into her donation folder, beside the old programs and offering slips. Another piece of history, carefully preserved. Another piece of her name, locked in place. Across town, Melissa typed out another post, but this time it sat in drafts. She knew better than to aim again without ammunition. And Evelyn? Evelyn took a final sip of her tea, set down the cup, and walked to the hallway mirror. She adjusted the pin on her lapel, Founder's Circle, and smiled at her reflection. The house, like her heart, quiet, unshaken. Then her phone buzzed again. From Naomi. "She's requesting a meeting. Do you want me to cancel it?" Evelyn stared at the message and tapped. "Let her come." The knock came at precisely 3:01 p.m. Not a tap, not a polite rapping, a firm, impatient demand at the door, followed by the unmistakable click of a heel on concrete. Evelyn didn't hurry. She placed her tea towel neatly over the arm of the chair, smoothed her blouse, and walked to the door with the calm of someone who'd already won the war and knew it. She opened it to find Melissa standing there, sunglasses perched on her head, lip gloss shining like a blade. Paul loomed behind her, hunched and hollow-eyed, a grocery bag in one hand, like he hadn't known this was more than a drop-by. "We need to talk," Melissa said, pushing past her without waiting for permission. Paul offered a weak "hello" as he followed. Evelyn closed the door gently and turned to face them in the living room. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting long gold streaks across the carpet. Everything in the room was quiet and intact. Melissa was the only thing out of place. Melissa turned sharply. "You didn't have to embarrass me like that." Evelyn didn't answer. She walked to the sideboard, opened the drawer, and retrieved the accordion folder she'd prepared in advance. She placed it on the coffee table between them and sat down. "What's that?" Melissa asked. "My receipts," Evelyn replied. 37 years worth of giving, building fund, youth program, scholarships, flood repairs, choir robes, sanctuary restoration. My name on every line. Melissa scoffed. "So you're keeping score now?" "No," Evelyn said, opening the folder and spreading the papers like cards in a winning hand. "I kept records." Paul sat slowly, eyes dropping to the documents. He scanned a few pages, Handwritten thank you notes from pastors, printed statements from the treasurer's office, dedication confirmations with Evelyn's signature at the bottom. Melissa crossed her arms. You could have just put my name on the plaque. Evelyn tilted her head. Why would I? Because I'm your daughter, she snapped, and because I've worked just as hard to represent this family in that church. Paul's head jerked toward her. Melissa. No, she continued, her voice climbing. I show up. I sit in the front. People know me. You think any of them care about old envelopes and filing cabinets? Evelyn stood and walked over to the mantel. She picked up a framed photo, her and Samuel in front of the old sanctuary, groundbreaking day, spades in hand, both smiling like they'd just built a world together. I gave, Evelyn said quietly. You took. Melissa flushed. I never took anything. You took my seat, Evelyn said, not turning. You took my kindness for weakness. You took silence for absence. And when you had the chance to stand beside me, you asked the usher not to waste a pew. Paul sat back slowly, eyes now locked on the floor. His fingers tightened around the grocery bag until it crinkled. Melissa's voice softened, syrupy now. Mama, I just thought. The front door creaked open again. Didn't know we were having a family meeting? Doris said, stepping inside like she lived there. Good thing I brought biscuits. She held up a brown paper sack, then paused at the sight of the coffee table war zone. Her eyes narrowed. Ah, she said, the part where the prodigal daughter wants to rewrite the will without having to move back in. Melissa bristled. Excuse me? No need to excuse you, Doris said, walking to Evelyn's side and setting the biscuits down with theatrical care. We're all caught up. Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply gathered the papers back into the folder. Neat and silent. I'm not changing the dedication, she said, and I'm not putting your name on what you didn't build. Melissa looked between them. Evelyn calm, Doris poised, Paul sagging like a man praying for teleportation. You think this is over? Melissa said, voice shaking now. You think a plaque makes you better than me? Evelyn finally looked at her, eyes steady. No, but it made things clear. Melissa stood, snatched her purse from the couch, and stormed toward the door. Paul followed. Slower. He paused in the doorway, glancing back at Evelyn. I didn't know, he said softly. Evelyn didn't reply. Melissa's car door slammed. The engine roared. And Doris, still standing with her arms crossed, just said, Well, that went how we expected. Evelyn walked back to the table, smoothed her blouse again. I think she thought she could control the visit, she murmured. She thought wrong, Doris said. And something tells me she's about to learn a whole lot more she didn't want to know. The law office smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, just like it had the week before. But this time, Evelyn didn't feel like a donor. She felt like a decision-maker. Franklin looked up from behind his desk as she entered, removing his reading glasses with a practiced grace. Ms. Carter, I was wondering when I'd see you again. Evelyn gave a small smile. You still have time this afternoon? For you? Always. He gestured to the same leather chair. Let me guess. Melissa didn't take the plaque news well. She took it all the way to my living room, Evelyn replied, settling her bag beside her chair. And she's still living in my house. Still not paying rent. Still acting like it's owed to her. Franklin folded his hands. You'd like to change that? I'd like to remind her it was never hers to begin with. He opened a drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began jotting notes. Let's talk property law then. South Carolina has very specific protections for family members, especially if there's no formal lease. But if you gave her no tenancy agreement, no mail in her name, and no rent history. She never paid a dime, Evelyn said flatly. Samuel and I let her move in after the job loss. That was... 6 years ago. Franklin paused, tapping the pen against the pad. 6 years is a long time to grow entitled. She grew more than entitled, Evelyn said. She grew bold. He nodded. You have the right to revoke informal residence, but you'll need to give her written notice. 30 days is standard. 60 if you're feeling generous. Evelyn raised a brow. I'm not. Franklin chuckled. Didn't think so. He slid a folder across the desk. I've drafted a formal letter. It explains that her guest occupancy is ending. You're not evicting a tenant. You're withdrawing hospitality. Evelyn opened the folder, read the opening line aloud. This letter serves as formal notice that your non-rent-paying residence at 318 Maplewood is being rescinded, effective 30 days from receipt. She looked up. What happens if she refuses to leave? You let me file a writ for unlawful detainer, but something tells me she'll storm out before the ink dries. A knock came at the door. Naomi peeked in, followed by Ruth, Evelyn's old Sunday school co-teacher, now retired and a permanent fixture around the church office. Oh, Ruth said, spotting Evelyn. Didn't mean to interrupt. Unless you're talking about Melissa, in which case I absolutely meant to. Franklin smiled. Just wrapping up a legal consult. Good, Ruth said, plopping into the visitor's chair without hesitation. It's about time someone reminded that girl she didn't buy the bricks she's walking on. Naomi laughed softly. Amen. Evelyn signed the bottom of the letter with slow, elegant script. It's not about revenge, she said quietly. It's about making the boundaries clear. I gave. She took. Now she's done. Franklin sealed the envelope and handed it to Naomi for certified delivery. I'll make sure we track it. If she tries to challenge, we'll be ready. As Evelyn rose to leave, Ruth patted her arm. If I had a daughter like that, I'd have handed her the notice wrapped in scripture. I'll settle for paperwork, Evelyn replied. Back at home, Melissa was already sulking in the guest room, the one that used to be Samuel's office. The blinds were closed, the curtains drawn, her suitcase half-zipped and untouched in the corner. The house felt heavier when she was inside, like her presence carried its own weather system. Evelyn stepped into the kitchen, took out a glass pitcher and began slicing lemons. Quietly, calmly. She had a copy of the notice in her purse, ready to leave on the hallway table. And she wasn't afraid of the storm it might cause. Later that evening, she caught a glimpse of Melissa through the open hallway, scrolling on her phone, her brows furrowed. No doubt drafting another cryptic post. But this time, Evelyn had already posted the final word. Legally, officially, and unshakably. The next morning, Charleston's air was thick with the kind of humidity that made everything, emotions included, feel heavier. Evelyn stood at her kitchen window, watching a heron pick its way along the shallow creek behind her cottage. She sipped her coffee in silence, the envelope still on the hallway table behind her, addressed, sealed, and ready to shift the ground beneath Melissa's feet. The house was quiet, but not still. A tension moved through the walls, like it could sense what was coming. At precisely 9:14 a.m., her phone buzzed with a call from Franklin. It's been delivered, he said. Signed for and time-stamped. 30 days begins now. Evelyn nodded into the phone, calm. Thank you, Franklin. He paused. I've reviewed everything again. Melissa has no legal claim to the home, the property, or your estate, unless you choose to give her one. I won't, Evelyn replied simply. Franklin's voice softened. It's unusual, you know. Most people your age avoid confrontation, but you're unflinching. I've lived too long to flinch at a boundary being drawn, she said, especially when it's mine. Later that afternoon, Doris stopped by with 2 cups of strong sweet tea and a bakery box from the corner cafe. She kicked off her shoes at the front door like she'd been doing it her whole life. She see the letter yet? Doris asked, setting the box down with a grin. She read it at the mailbox, Evelyn said, opening the lid to reveal lemon bars. I watched from the parlor window. And? She didn't cry, Evelyn said. But she didn't walk in like she owned the floorboards either. Doris cackled. Progress. They sat in the parlor, forks scraping gently against china plates. The air hummed with cicadas outside and quiet triumph inside. Upstairs, the bedroom door creaked open. Melissa came down barefoot, in yesterday's leggings and a sweatshirt far too hot for the season. She paused at the edge of the room, the letter folded in half in one hand. You went to a lawyer? She said, voice flat but tight. I went to my lawyer, Evelyn corrected, not bothering to rise. And now it's your lawyer's turn, if you have one. Melissa didn't speak. Her fingers twitched against the letter, but she didn't tear it. You're really doing this? You've had 6 years of free rent, meals, and second chances, Evelyn said, and you've used them to criticize my place in church, my choices in this home, and my silence. You mistook kindness for weakness. Melissa opened her mouth, but Doris stood up before she could speak. Don't, Doris said. Her voice was honey over steel. Don't come down here looking for a court battle you already lost in conscience. Melissa's mouth snapped shut. She turned and walked slowly back up the stairs, letter still clutched in her hand. The door closed more quietly than Evelyn expected. She's going to rage, Doris said, returning to her lemon bar. Privately, online, to Paul, to the shampoo bottles, but she won't be able to stop this. Evelyn reached into her purse and removed another copy of the notice. She placed it into her legal folder with her will, insurance documents, and deed to the house. Doris glanced at the folder. You locking it all down? I'm making sure the next person doesn't have to. That evening, as dusk settled over the city and the marshes turned to shadow, Evelyn sat in the garden with her hands resting on her lap. The jasmine was blooming again. The air smelled like freedom earned. Her phone buzzed again. A post from Melissa, public this time. Imagine being raised to serve and then erased when it's inconvenient. I won't stay silent. Below it, a hashtag. Can't spare the rod. Evelyn read it once, then turned off the phone. Inside, she walked to her bookshelf and pulled down the family Bible. She slid the letter between the pages, marking the parable of the prodigal son. But this time, there would be no fattened calf waiting. The next morning arrived soft and gray, with a misty hush over Charleston that made the whole street feel like it had hit pause. Evelyn stood at the kitchen sink, slowly drying her silverware one piece at a time, her hands moving with the same care she'd used for Sunday suppers, Easter brunches, and wedding toasts. Ritual, not habit. The house was still. Melissa hadn't come downstairs. No clatter of coffee mugs, no muttered complaints about Doris lurking like a sitcom neighbor. Just quiet, and Evelyn liked it that way. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Franklin Harris. She answered with a calm, "Good morning," already knowing what he'd say. "Morning, Ms. Carter. Just a quick update for your peace of mind," Franklin said, his voice rich and even. "I reviewed the title, the inheritance clause from your husband's will, and the current deed registration." "And?" Evelyn asked, reaching for the next spoon. "There's no loophole," he said. "No tenancy claim, no financial tie. Melissa has no legal ground to sue for ownership or residency. She's not even a partial heir if you've updated your will, which I know you have." "I have," Evelyn confirmed. "Last month. Scholarship funds in place. Melissa is not." "Then you're clear," Franklin said. "Legally, permanently, and irrevocably." She didn't smile, but she did nod. "Thank you." "Of course. And for what it's worth, I've seen messier battles go to court for far less. You handled this with more grace than most judges see in a month." Evelyn hung up and placed the phone back on the towel. She returned to polishing the silver. 1 teaspoon, 2 forks, a butter knife. Doris arrived just before noon, letting herself in with that particular knock. 2 firm raps and a pause, followed by a cheerful, "Hope you've got caffeine." She carried 2 paper cups and a sleeve of ginger cookies tucked under one arm. "I brought reinforcements," Doris said, slipping off her sandals and heading straight for the kitchen table. "Any sightings from the sulk monster upstairs?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not since last night." "Probably still drafting an Instagram essay about betrayal," Doris muttered. Subtitle: "When Mommy Stops Paying for Your Poor Life Choices." Evelyn chuckled quietly. "You're not helping." "Oh, I'm not trying to help," Doris said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I'm just here for the post-game celebration." They sat in companionable quiet for a few minutes, ginger cookies breaking clean, the scent of citrus polish still lingering in the air. Outside, the wind rustled the azaleas along the porch. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. This time, a text alert. Melissa Carter posted a new status. She didn't open it, but the preview said enough. "Toxic parents love hiding behind paperwork. But the truth doesn't need notarization. Some of us were raised by ghosts in pastel sweaters." Doris leaned over, saw the screen, and snorted. "Well, she's just one Etsy font away from publishing a memoir." Evelyn didn't respond. She just turned the phone face down and continued folding the linen napkin on her lap. Melissa had always liked drama, but now she had no stage. 2 houses down, Paul stood awkwardly in the front yard, watering flowers that weren't his. One of the neighbors, a kind man named Mr. Jenkins, nodded politely as he walked past. Paul nodded back, eyes darting, ashamed. The shame had started to bloom on him lately. Slow, like mildew. The kind that creeps under paint and ruins the wall before anyone notices. Evelyn watched through the window for a moment, then returned to her tea. Another text buzzed across the phone screen. "Naomi Brooks. We saw the post. Pastor saw it too. Don't worry. Congregation's with you. Everyone knows who built this church." Evelyn typed only 2 words in return. "I know." That evening, Melissa finally emerged, standing at the top of the stairs like she was about to descend a runway. Her eyes scanned the room, waiting for something. A crack, a guilt, a welcome. Evelyn didn't look up. She simply placed the last fork into the drawer, closed it softly, and said, 30 days. Melissa didn't respond. She turned and went back upstairs, her steps quieter than before. And in the silence that followed, Evelyn allowed herself something small but fierce. A smile, one only Doris saw and immediately matched. The sound of cardboard dragging against wood echoed through the hallway like a warning. Evelyn looked up from her armchair and calmly set aside her book. A graceful exit, ironically. Melissa was in the foyer, wrestling 2 half-packed boxes toward the door like a martyr in a 3-act play. Sweat dotted her brow, but her makeup was still perfect. Always the performance. "You think this is over?" Melissa hissed, breath shallow. "You think this letter means I'm just going to vanish like a bad sermon?" Evelyn stood, slowly, smoothing her skirt. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She stepped between Melissa and the front door. Melissa stopped short, blinking. "Move, Mother." Evelyn didn't. Melissa's voice rose. "You can't kick me out." Paul stood at the base of the stairs, a suitcase in one hand, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked exhausted, less like a man and more like a shadow of one. "She can," he muttered, not meeting either of their eyes. "It's her house. We never paid a dime." Melissa spun on him. "Are you serious right now?" Paul's shoulders sagged. "I told you. She gave us a roof, not a deed." Evelyn opened the hallway drawer and placed a folded copy of the legal notice on the entryway table, Melissa's name typed clearly at the top, the 30-day mark underlined in Franklin's neat handwriting. "You're not being evicted. Evelyn said. "You're being released." "You think this is justice?" Melissa snapped. "You think this makes you some kind of saint?" "I think it makes me a woman who finally stopped saying yes." Melissa's fists clenched. Her voice cracked. "I needed this house." Evelyn tilted her head. "You needed it when you lost your job. That was 6 years ago. What have you needed since? Silence? Control? The front pew with your name on it?" Paul looked up at that, and for once, just once, he didn't move to comfort her. Then came the voice from the front porch. "Well, this is worth canceling my mani-pedi." Doris stepped inside, phone already raised, recording quietly. "Don't worry," she said, voice sugary. "Just getting a little footage in case anyone wants to spin the story." Melissa's eyes widened. "You're filming this?" "Only because you didn't have the decency to leave when decency was an option," Doris said. Evelyn didn't blink. "I asked 30 days ago. Today is 31. There was a knock at the door. This time measured. Official. Naomi had called earlier, quietly, just to ask if Evelyn needed backup. Evelyn had replied, "Not yet. But ask Officer Haywood to keep his radio on." Now here he was. Officer Haywood stood tall in the doorway, hands folded calmly at his belt. "Ladies," he said, glancing at the scene. Melissa scoffed. "You called the police on your own daughter?" "I called the city to confirm a property notice," Evelyn replied. "They sent the appropriate reader." Haywood nodded at Melissa. "I've seen the documents. This isn't an eviction, it's a rescinded invitation. You've overstayed your welcome." "I grew up here," Melissa snapped. "No," Evelyn said gently. "You grew up in this family. That's different than this house." For a long, quiet moment, the room held its breath. Melissa's eyes darted between Paul, Doris, Haywood, and finally Evelyn. Her chin quivered, but not from grief, from disbelief. She looked down at the boxes. "Fine." She picked one up with a grunt and shoved past Doris, muttering curses under her breath. Paul grabbed the duffel bag and followed without a word. Haywood stepped aside as they passed through. Melissa paused on the porch, turned halfway, and spat. "You're going to die in this house alone." Doris, still holding her phone, whispered, "God willing, and in peace." Evelyn stepped forward, but not to argue. She reached for the front door and said only, "You left long before I asked you to." Then she closed it, softly. Not a slam, just a seal. The house fell into a deep, settled quiet. Doris exhaled. Well, that was biblical. Evelyn locked the deadbolt, turned back toward the parlor, and finally, let herself sit down. But the peace only lasted seconds, because upstairs, the guest room door creaked open again. And down came Paul, alone, no suitcase this time. "Can I ask you something?" he said, voice low. Evelyn met his eyes and braced herself. The sky over Charleston had turned pewter by the time Evelyn pushed open the heavy glass door to Franklin Harris's office. The creak of the hinges echoed faintly, as though the old building itself understood the weight of what she was about to do. She paused in the doorway, adjusting the clasp on her handbag. Inside, the air smelled of rain on brick and lemon oil. Steady, clean, unsentimental. Franklin stood as soon as he saw her. "Ms. Carter," he said warmly, motioning her inside. "I've got the draft ready." Evelyn stepped in with deliberate calm. Today she wore a soft gray dress with a pearl collar, the kind of understated dignity that didn't beg for attention, but commanded it anyway. Doris was already seated at the end of the conference table, glasses perched on her nose and a styrofoam cup of coffee in front of her. "Look who came prepared to sign her life away," Doris said with a smile that was half joke, half armor. Evelyn smiled faintly back. "Not my life. Just the part they've mistaken for theirs." Franklin slid a thick folder across the polished wood table. This, he said, revokes any prior testamentary bequests to Melissa Carter and reallocates them to the Carter Fund for Women in Systems Engineering at First Baptist, perpetual and binding. Evelyn sat and drew the folder closer. Her hands didn't tremble. Show me. He opened to the first page and began to explain each clause in his low, even voice. Clause 1, property. Clause 2, personal effects. Clause 3, financial accounts. He pointed to the final page. Clause 4, charitable bequest. This is where the scholarship fund appears. It will bear your name and Samuel's name jointly, unless you'd like a different inscription. That's perfect, Evelyn said. Her voice held no hesitation. Samuel always wanted his work to outlast him. This way, it will. Franklin nodded. Once you sign this, there's no ambiguity. No contest, no loophole. I want it airtight, Evelyn said. Melissa has had enough of my patience. She won't get my legacy, too. You're doing the right thing, Franklin said softly. Evelyn took the pen he offered, black ink already primed, and signed her name on each line. The script flowed as steady as it had on the pew donation. Evelyn. She dotted the final N with a decisive flick. Doris leaned back, watching. I never thought I'd see the day, she murmured. Evelyn placed the pen down. Neither did I. But it's time. Franklin rotated the folder toward Doris. If you'll sign as witness, he said. Doris adjusted her glasses, scanned the line, and scrawled her signature with a flourish. There, she said, capping the pen. In case anyone thinks this was a whim. Franklin placed the documents in a heavy cream envelope and pressed the firm red seal at the flap. Filed as of today. Copies will go to the probate court and the church's scholarship committee. Melissa has no standing to challenge it. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until that moment. Something in her chest, tightly coiled for decades, finally loosened. She rose, smoothing the fabric of her dress. Thank you, Franklin. He stood as well. You've turned injury into impact. Not many people can say that. Evelyn offered him her hand. He shook it firmly, then stepped aside as Doris rose to join her. You're lighter, Doris observed as they walked toward the elevator. You can feel it in the air. I am, Evelyn said simply. It's done. Outside, the rain had started to fall in a light mist, dampening the crepe myrtles that lined the sidewalk. The city smelled like wet stone and salt water. Evelyn stood at the top of the steps, letting the drizzle cool her skin. She felt strangely unburdened, like a chapter had truly closed. Doris opened her umbrella and tilted it to cover them both. Pie on me after this? Pie, Evelyn said, smiling. And maybe a hymn. They started down the steps together. But halfway, Evelyn's phone buzzed in her handbag. She slipped it out, thumb brushing the screen. An unread message glowed there. No name, just a number she recognized. Melissa Carter. I know what you did. And if you think I'm done, you're wrong. Evelyn stared at the message, the rain making tiny dimples on the phone's surface. She didn't type a reply. She simply locked the screen, slipped it back into her bag, and walked on with Doris, her smile calm but her eyes sharp. The rain had passed by morning, leaving a thin shimmer on the garden leaves. Dew clung to the azaleas, their blooms heavy and vibrant. Evelyn knelt beside them in her old gardening smock, hands deep in soil, when the door creaked behind her. Paul stepped onto the porch, shoes scuffing slightly against the worn wood. She didn't look up right away. Just brushed dirt from her fingers, patted the base of the last plant, and stood with the careful grace of someone used to getting up without assistance or applause. She's gone, he said. Evelyn turned slowly. Paul stood there empty-handed, no suitcase. No apology in his posture, just the gray weariness of someone who'd finally let go of a weight he hadn't meant to carry this long. She moved in with her friend from work, he added as if it mattered. The one with the condo off Beaufan. Evelyn nodded once. I see. She told me I had to choose, he said, eyes not quite meeting hers. Between her and whatever this has become. Evelyn raised a brow. And what did you say? Paul let out a dry, humorless laugh. I said I wanted a place to sit in peace. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that fills porches and parlors and the space between endings. I should have said something sooner, he said quietly. Years ago. Evelyn gave him nothing but silence. Sometimes silence was kinder than answers. He nodded once, understanding, then stepped down from the porch and walked toward the sidewalk. She didn't call after him. He didn't look back. By the end of the week, the congregation had caught up. The whispers came first. Whispered greetings with knowing looks. Half smiles in the fellowship hall. One woman clutched Evelyn's hand after the midweek service and said, We always knew the truth lived quietly. Evelyn only nodded. She didn't need to correct anyone. She'd already put the truth in brass and paper and bloodline. On Saturday afternoon, Doris appeared like clockwork, holding a pie carrier with a checkered towel tucked under the lid. Blueberry crumb, she announced. Not for comfort, just for celebration. She set the pie down on the kitchen table and pulled 2 plates from the cupboard like she lived there, because she nearly did. Her presence had become as regular as Evelyn's evening prayers. Church ladies are buzzing like bees, Doris said, slicing neatly. Word is, Melissa's staying in a condo with bad plumbing and no AC. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Unfortunate. Unfortunate for the friend, Doris muttered, but poetic for the rest of us. They laughed gently over their tea and pie, the air between them easier now. No dread, no decisions, no legal folders waiting to be opened. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the parlor in golden stripes, the doorbell rang. A courier stood on the steps with a large white envelope, hand-addressed in Naomi's careful script. Inside, a church thank you card, signed by every committee member, elder, and choir leader. The words were simple. For your years of giving, your unwavering faith, and the seat you've more than earned. Thank you, Evelyn. Tucked behind it, a small laminated certificate from the First Baptist Endowment Office. Evelyn Carter, founding donor. Carter Women in Systems Engineering Fund. Perpetual scholarship. She read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it with the others. By Sunday morning, the house felt different. Not empty. Clear. The air moved easier. Light lingered longer in the corners. Evelyn stood in her garden just after sunrise, pruning shears in hand. She clipped back the dead heads on her rose bushes, trimmed the basil, and finally turned to the azaleas. She knelt, planted 3 new ones, one white, one pink, one deep, impossible red. As she packed the soil in place, she whispered aloud. Not to Samuel, not to God, but maybe to herself. I planted roots. She dug for spoils. Her hands moved with reverence. The breeze lifted her hair. The life she had built was still hers. No daughter's name on it. No false claim over it. Only what had been earned. Only what had been kept. And just as she stood to go back inside, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out. A voicemail. No caller ID. She hesitated. Pressed play. Melissa's voice. Breathy. Forced calm. Mom. You're going to regret making this so public. You think a scholarship and a plaque make you invincible? You're wrong. You'll see what I mean soon enough. Evelyn stared out across her garden. Then she reached down, pressed delete, and smiled. The headline came quietly. Not in a phone call, not in a knock, but through the smallest ripple, a whispered name over coffee at the church annex, a link texted to Doris from her cousin's cousin in Greenville. Evelyn didn't even check her phone. It was Doris who broke the silence, arriving on the front porch with a bakery box and an arched eyebrow. "You want the cake first or the gossip?" Evelyn, still in her gardening gloves, wiped her hands on a towel and held the door open. "I'll take whichever one's sweeter." They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight falling through the lace curtains in dappled patches, the way it always had. Doris opened the bakery box and revealed a generous wedge of cinnamon coffee cake. 2 forks, no plates. "She filed," Doris said. Chapter 7. Names on the court docket, plain as day. Evelyn blinked once. "Melissa?" Doris nodded, stabbing the edge of the cake with her fork. "Melissa Joy Carter. Personal bankruptcy. Too many credit cards, no income, and apparently, a designer shoe addiction she couldn't finance with grace?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She reached for her Bible on the corner of the table and pulled out a soft cloth, began to polish the leather cover, slow and steady, one corner at a time. "I suppose," she said. She thought entitlement was a credit line, too. "She sure treated it like one," Doris muttered. "Now the whole town knows. Paul's name wasn't on the filing, but he might as well have been. Man's working part-time at the hardware store down on East Bay, just trying to keep the lights on." Evelyn paused in her polishing. "Is he still staying at the rental above Jenkins' garage?" "Far as I know." Doris took a thoughtful bite. "Not much of a view, but he says it's quiet." Evelyn nodded. He wanted peace. They sat in companionable silence, the sound of the wind brushing the magnolia leaves outside, the smell of cinnamon and sugar grounding the room. Later that afternoon, Pastor Green arrived. Unannounced, but not unexpected. He wore no collar, just khakis and a pressed shirt, a folder in hand and a look of quiet respect in his eyes. Doris let him in and made herself scarce, disappearing toward the back garden with a wave and a smirk. "Ms. Carter," Pastor said, stepping inside. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Evelyn said, setting aside her Bible. "Come in." He handed her the folder. "The church council voted this week. Quietly, unanimously." She opened it. Inside, a printed rendering of a new plaque, the kind displayed near the choir loft entrance. "In gratitude and grace, Evelyn M. Carter. For decades of faithful service, enduring generosity, and unwavering grace. May her example forever lead." "We'd like to install it before Founders' Sunday," he said, "and include a note in the bulletin, if you're comfortable." Evelyn traced her name with one gloved finger. "I'm comfortable." The pastor nodded. "I want you to know, we see the strength behind the silence. We always did. But now, everyone else does too." He left with a prayer of thanks and a promise to see her Sunday. Evelyn returned to the table and sat for a long while, the plaque design still open before her. Not vanity, not victory, just something solid, proof. That evening, she walked out to her garden again. The azaleas were thriving. A hummingbird dipped into the lavender. Peace had taken root where chaos had once walked through her front door in heels and entitlement. The kitchen radio played faintly behind her, a hymn she didn't remember requesting, but recognized anyway. She hummed along unconsciously as she trimmed the basil, and then the phone rang. She didn't rush. She finished the clipping, wiped her hands, picked it up. Voicemail. From Paul. "Hi, Evelyn, I just wanted you to know..." She left. The condo, the city, everything. "I don't know where she's going. She won't talk to me anymore. But I wanted to say, thank you. For showing me what it looks like to stand tall, even when everyone else sits down. I think I forgot what decency looked like. But I remember now." She didn't play it again, just saved it. And then, calmly, she returned to her Bible, polished it once more, and slid the new church folder inside beside the scholarship letter. The house stayed quiet, but outside, headlights passed slowly, too slowly, along the curb. A black car, no plates, and the passenger window was open. Sunday morning broke warm and gold over Charleston, the sun rising without apology across the harbor and filtering through the oaks that lined the street like sentinels. Evelyn Carter stood in front of the mirror in her entryway, slipping on her pearl earrings with steady hands. Her church hat, dove gray with a single silk rose, sat ready on the hall table. She took one long look at herself, her posture straight, her eyes clear, and nodded once. It was time. She stepped out onto the porch, locking the door behind her. A breeze lifted the hem of her dress, brushing against the freshly clipped azaleas, the ones she'd planted herself. There was no sign of the black car from days before, just the stillness of a morning with nothing left to prove. Downtown, the First Baptist Church bells began to chime. Inside the sanctuary, soft voices rose with the prelude, hymnals opened like instinct. The pews were already filling, coats unbuttoned, hair smoothed, purses tucked beneath seats. A little girl in patent leather shoes giggled, hushed quickly by her father. And then the doors opened, heads turned, not all at once, but in gentle succession, like a tide moving in reverse. Evelyn walked down the center aisle, her heels soundless on the carpet. Her Bible cradled against her hip, not rushed, not regal, just grounded. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows and fell in ribbons across the pews, dancing in hues of rose and sapphire. And where it struck the end of the front row, right side, second seat in, it hit brass. The plaque gleamed. Reserved in honor of Evelyn M. Carter, in gratitude and grace. She approached it with reverence, then paused, not to hesitate, but to own the moment. She rested her hand lightly on the top of the pew, then stepped in, lowering herself slowly into the cushion that still remembered her shape. Around her, murmurs softened into stillness. From the choir loft, Doris King beamed. She didn't wave, didn't nod, just lifted her chin in silent praise, lips curved around a hymn not yet sung. Evelyn opened her Bible. When the organ began, it was with the power of old truths, chords rising, familiar and sure. The congregation stood. Evelyn stood with them, voice steady as she joined the song. After the hymn, Pastor Green stepped forward, his notes in hand, his eyes scanning the room, until they landed on the front row. He set his notes aside. "Before we begin," he said, "the council asked me to say a few words of thanks. You may have noticed a new plaque on our front pew." A few chuckles, a few nods. "We did that," the pastor said, "not for ceremony, not for show, but because there are some people whose names deserve to be built into the church, people who served before they were asked, who gave before they were thanked, and who stood when others sat down." He turned to look at Evelyn directly. "And so today, we honor Ms. Evelyn Carter, not just for what she's given, but for how she's lived. With dignity, with grace, and with the kind of strength that doesn't ask for credit, but builds legacies anyway." The congregation turned as one. Some nodded, some smiled. One elderly deacon near the back dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief. Evelyn didn't stand. She didn't wave. She simply placed her hand on the brass plaque beside her. Solid, permanent, and absolutely earned. The sermon resumed. The morning unfolded. But the energy in the sanctuary had shifted. There was reverence in the air, not just for faith, but for fortitude. After the service, as parishioners filtered out with programs in hand and smiles on their faces, no one dared sit in Evelyn's pew. They passed it with respect. A few reached out to touch the plaque as they went. Quiet gestures, wordless praise. Back at home, Evelyn placed her Bible on the table and slipped off her gloves. Doris joined her minutes later with a casserole and commentary, but Evelyn only smiled. She had kept what mattered. She had spoken without shouting. She had stayed. And as she stood at the window, watching the church steeple shimmer in the distance, she whispered aloud, softly, but with steel in her spine, "She dismissed me in church." A pause. Then, with finality, "But I kept the front row forever?"